and welcome back to NewsReal with Joe and Neil.
I'm Joe.
I'm Neil, and this week, anti-Semitism. It's a thing, in case you didn't know. It's been a crazy couple of weeks in the United States. US media, politics is swarming around this issue of a new congresswoman's anti-Semitism. This shouldn't really be newsworthy, but there you go. It is. Another reason for discussing this today is because it's hard to miss the fact that this is now the concurrent issue in three major Western countries: the United States, the United Kingdom, and France. Pretty much simultaneously, but for entirely different reasons, this thing has emerged, the issue of anti-Semitism. It's remarkable, but that's just basically the only thing we want to say about it, really, just for people to take notice of the fact that simultaneously in three countries, for three different reasons. This isn't like there's one scandal and it has connecting fibers. Say there's a corruption scandal involving a politician and a corporation, and they both have links in two or three different countries. No, it erupted internally for its own reasons separately at the same time in three countries. And that those three countries just happen to be pretty much three of them, like together they form the kind of basic troika, the core of the Western NATO / banking / Western empire or Western system. Is that a coincidence? Probably not, because what impacts one pretty much will impact the other. But ostensibly, as the media stories go, these are three very separate issues.
But they're not.
And there's nothing to see here as far as the coincidence of timing is concerned.
There's nothing to see here?
Well, no one is making that link. In fact, that's not true. I found one article that's actually noticed and made past comment on the fact that simultaneously it's happening in three different countries. That was a Haaretz editorial, and they said something to the effect that, just in passing at the end of their editorial condemning anti-Semitism, that as a kind of, this was proof to Jews generally and Israelis in particular, there you go. It's a real issue. It's a real phenomenon. Most people out there hate you because you're Jewish. And look how it just flew across the Atlantic from the United Kingdom recently to the United States. That was it. That was the end of their any discussion about why it might be happening in three places at the same time. Well,
let's ask some basic questions.
Right.
To see if we can define some basic truths here. Is it true to say that major Western governments have for quite a long time been extremely sensitive to Jewish interests, or the interests of Jewish people, and by extension the State of Israel?
True.
The next question is why?
Because the Holocaust, I suppose, is the abbreviated
what's
answer.
Their narrative? What would their
boilerplate answer?
What would their answer be? Yeah. Their answer would be
because the Holocaust, and thus never again.
Right. But is there more to it than that? Obviously, if you go to a kind of geopolitical perspective, then there would be more to it in the sense of Israel and the creation of the State of Israel in the Middle East just after the First World War, and the role that Israel has played from a geopolitical perspective in service to Western interests in the region, in the Middle Eastern region, right?
It's important to it.
It's important to it because Israel, as a country in the Middle East, is obviously fully aligned with the West and the Western interests in the Middle East, and therefore it's like an outpost of Western interests in that part of the world, strategically important part of the world. So those two, which is on first? You take a cynical view, and you would say that Western politicians, being interested in their own power and positions, would be more concerned about the geopolitical aspects of support for Israel, rather than any supposed threat to Jewish people from anti-Semitism, right?
True.
You would be cynical and say that that's probably what motivates them. Of course, they talk mostly about, or almost only about, anti-Semitism and the Holocaust and never again, because that is more appealing to people. It tugs at people's heartstrings and makes them look like good, sensitive, caring, anti-racist or anti-anti-Semitic type people, right?
Yes.
So it's, if you're going to choose one, you're going to push to the public. You're going to choose the angle of, I care about anti-Semitism and making sure the Holocaust, etc., that kind of thing never happens again. That's why I'm all for Israel. Basically, that's the source of my support for Israel or our support for Israel. But real politics and all that, it's really probably got nothing to do with any concern for about a rise in anti-Semitism or concern for the welfare of the Jewish people, etc., etc. It's a really difficult problem.
Right there, there's already a paradox. Maybe the first one in a whole series of them. In defending oneself, if one is being accused of such anti-Semitism, one points out that, well, hang on a second. I specifically said this, and it's nearly always, invariably, unless they're actually genuinely hate Jews and really do believe Jews are the fountain of all evil, it's nearly always a comment they made about Israel, and specifically Israel's policies vis-a-vis the Palestinians. We've just gone through the third night of them bombing Gaza. You are allowed to say quite reasonably, without deserving accusations of being a vile scum of the earth racist, hang on a second, that's not on. Or even just to mention the fact that it's happening. It's quietly happening all the time, but it usually doesn't get any media attention. So right there, that's the first paradox. Your defense against being called an anti-Semite is, I'm not against the Jews, but I am against what the Israeli government does in general, or maybe even just this in specific.
Right. Well, that goes to the heart of the current issue right now, where you had a U.S. congresswoman make those kind of statements, basically that she was, it's okay that she should be allowed to be critical of the state of Israel, and also why should she I suppose she went a bit further. This is what's her face, Ilhan
Omar.
Omar, yeah. She's a new Muslim congresswoman, and she basically said that she questioned why she should be required as a congresswoman, as a U.S. politician, to be kind of overly favourable to the state of Israel, where she's not allowed to criticize a foreign power. Why should she, show undue allegiance?
That
to
actually came after. I have that sort of timeline. I think I've got my head around it, thanks to there are 1,000 summaries out there, and they're all pretty much in agreement. It actually began with a kind of attack against her, an oblique one, from a Republican. I'm not even sure he's a senator himself, Kevin McCarthy. Maybe just an organizer. Anyway, he threatened that Ilhan Omar and another new young female Muslim Democratic congressman, I think for Michigan, I forgot her name, accused them both kind of indirectly. I didn't accuse them. In fact, he said specifically that he will be seeking to punish them for their critical views of Israel. This was February 11th. He tweets, if they, the Democrats in general, the party, do not take action, I think you'll see action from myself. This criticism of Israel cannot sustain itself. It's unacceptable in this country. He wasn't referring even specifically to anything she had just said, but to her known support for the BDS, the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions movement, mostly on campuses in the United States. She didn't even respond to that, not yet. Glenn Greenwald kind of gave this tweet some legs to a wider audience by tweeting in response, again obliquely. He's not counterattacking against this Kevin McCarthy. He says, it's stunning how much time U.S. political leaders spend defending a foreign nation, even if it means attacking the free speech of Americans. That's a simple general truth you can perfectly well say in response. Glenn Greenwald is, of course, himself Jewish. But anyway, Omar then tweets in response to Glenn Greenwald with just a one-liner. It's all about the Benjamin's baby. And then all hell breaks loose, and everyone freaks out and loses their mind.
Because that's an anti-Semitic trope, right? That's money.
This is where
Jews and money.
This is where it gets weird. Until February the 11th, 2019, that wasn't. That is a line from a rap song.
No, but it is an anti-Semitic trope to make that reference, it's all about the Benjamins in the context of talking about support for Israel. And
Why?
Because an anti-Semitic trope is that Jews and money. Of course, that's the red flag. That's the thing that set people off. So you're talking about Jews and money here. Jews loving money, right? The covetous Jew and his love for money. That by definition, her saying that.
Oh, because she chose to use that there. But that line itself that song has never been considered.
No, but it doesn't matter. She can use any reference she wants to money. But if she refers to money in the context of a discussion about Jews, well, that's it. You're done. Bye-bye. Right. You're an anti-Semite.
Right.
You're saying Jews love money? Is that what you're saying? It seems like it. It's all about the Benjamins. What's all about the Benjamins? Jews? The Jewish lobby is all about Benjamins? All about $100 bills? Is that what you're saying? Apparently. Oh, so okay. So you're anti-Semite then? Okay, let's move on and let's throw you out of Congress and move on. You know. So that's the red flag. Like, you may as well say. I mean, it's close. The next worst thing would be some kind of blood libel or something. You know, or some kind of. You talk about circumcision.
Well, that's interesting. You need to explain that for me for that to be clear in my head. But these people, I don't want to say it's Jews in particular, because it's not just. There's a lot of people out there who got it right away. I don't know. Well, maybe I'm dumb and you all are super smart, because I've had to think it through. Because think about it, it's a double negative, the whole case. It's an anti-Semitism. Then you've got to work out what is anti-Semitism. And then you've got to work out what exactly are the references to Jews or not. The tropes, they're called, right? It's a freaking complex task, and yet there are some people who seem to be so exquisitely in tune with it, they instinctively know. Oh, yeah. But in anticipation, hang on, the words are coming out of someone's mouth. Yes, there they are. That's the end. But how did you know to anticipate that?
Well, because they're so common. I mean, it's like when you think of criticism of Jews, what do you think of? You know, and historically,
right? You know, money and influence,
right? You know, I mean, there's cartoons that were made during the, not just under the Nazis in Germany, but in other European countries at a time at the beginning of last century, and before that, when it was quite kosher, if you excuse the pun, to describe Jews in that way amongst Western politicians, like. Before that, in the 1800s, Disraeli, a British Prime Minister, was well known for his anti-Semitic views. Henry Ford, the maker of Ford automobiles, was a known, as called today, a known anti-Semite. You know, so there was a point in time when anti-Semitism was quite okay. I think Churchill as well was known to be a bit to say the odd bad thing about Jews. Winston Churchill. So at that time when it was more acceptable in civil society to say those kind of things, and it was being said by politicians and stuff like that. That's what gave rise to cartoons and different things like that portrayed Jews in this light. So and they persisted. You know, of course, you had the Holocaust and all of the negative stereotypes that were presented by the Nazis about Jews to justify the Holocaust and that kind of thing. So. It's part of the Western psyche at this point. You know what I mean? I mean, you can't. I mean, most people, at least that are, half clued in, know that there's certain things that you really can't say. You know that you really, and it's a taboo basically. It's a very clear taboo.
Nobody can say. Well, this is the question: is it nobody can say what everybody knows, or nobody can say what actually isn't true, and it's only producing harm?
Yeah, well, the bizarre thing is that one thing that Jews historically are accused of, and that is called anti-Semitic today, is kind of keeping themselves apart from the society, within the society, in the society within which they live. They kind of keep themselves apart, and have in the past been suspected or accused of, working in some way or other against that society. Whether or not that was true, the very mere fact of them keeping themselves apart would give rise to suspicions from other people. Could give rise to suspicions from other people in the society that there's something a bit suspicious about those Jews, quote unquote. So that I mean, there's no point in going into whether or not there's any truth to that or whatever, but I mean, there is truth to the fact that they kept themselves apart and do tend to keep themselves apart because of their cultural and religious background and beliefs, basically, that they are a people apart. I mean, it's in their religious books and stuff that they're a people apart, and there's all sorts of references that people probably know that the Jews themselves kind of ascribe to themselves, you know. So what's bizarre is that the fact that they have done that very often throughout history, kind of kept themselves apart, and that they do, in the religious texts, they do make claim to being a kind of a special people, let's say, or a God's chosen people type thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then to disallow ordinary people, or to forbid ordinary people from taking those, I think, objective facts and just repeating them. Of course, they shouldn't be used to persecute Jewish people or to engage in racism or anti-Semitism, whatever you want to call it, against Jews. But there is clearly a truth about that Jewish cultural mindset and religious mindset that does tend to set them apart. And in that sense, that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It shouldn't be a bad thing, unless they're doing something bad on the basis of it. Unless they're using it to gain influence and power that is in some way nefarious. And this is where we get back to the Palestinian situation, where it puts them, where people believe that kind of them setting themselves apart and gaining power and then using anti-Semitism to protect themselves from any reproachment allows them to do things, at least, and here I'm talking about the state of Israel, because it benefits from that protection as well, allows them to get away with doing things that other countries wouldn't get away with, wouldn't be allowed to get away with. Like, for example, you're not allowed in the US, and this is part of the reason we're talking about this, is you're not allowed to criticize Israel's actions against Palestinians. You're not allowed to call them kind of brutal or inhumane or war crimes, because that means you hate Jews. That means you're immediately thrown back into Nazi Germany, and it means that if you criticize Israel or the actions of the state of Israel, you're shut down by being accused of hating Jews and wanting to kill all the Jews, which is what many people repeatedly, over and over again, this isn't something new, have said that's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous to make that accusation against me when I see, the Israeli military indiscriminately bombing Gaza and killing hundreds of children. When I say, hey, Israel, that's a bit kind of, you don't think that's a bit excessive? Maybe you're being a bit bloodthirsty and brutal there. How dare you, dirty anti-Semite? You want to kill all the Jews, don't you?
Yeah, but this is fairly new in that it's being articulated officially at government levels now. We heard it from Macron. We discussed it briefly on the show a few weeks ago. It was shocking even for the French public discourse that the government was seriously considering equivocating, making no distinction between going, oh God, Israel, can you please stop bombing people, and oh, you hate the Jews. They were going to actually expand the definition of anti-Semitism to include criticism of Israel. Mm-hmm. So that's the only kind of new thing, in that it's at this kind of level of policy where it seems to be being taken seriously. Mm-hmm. Yeah, by Western governments and Western policymakers now.
But again, that then brings up the question of what influence do Jewish lobby groups have over Western politicians, that they would be able to push them to enact those kind of policies and pass those kind of laws to be so protective of Israel, that then gets you back into the kind of Jewish conspiracy trope. That there are Jews conspiring to gain control over Western politicians, and they're achieving it and they're doing it. But then at the same time, like we said at the beginning of the show, there's a convergence of interest there where Western politicians, like non-Jewish Western politicians, don't need to have their arms twisted so much, because they have a vested interest in protecting the state of Israel themselves. Because the state of Israel in the Middle East is an outpost of Western powers, of Anglo-America, let's say, of Western Europe, and particularly the USA. It's an outpost of that power center, or you could even call it just an outpost, an American outpost. It's the 52nd state, the 51st state. So when Glenn Greenwald says, how US politicians aren't allowed to criticize a foreign government, that's not exactly true in in reality, in the way things in the real politic world, because Israel isn't really a foreign country. It's not a foreign nation. It's part of America.
Yeah, which was very well articulated by Nancy Pelosi. That was an old video that was dug up recently, where in a Q&A somewhere in D.C. to an audience, she said, you know, if the capital, D.C., were to collapse into the dust into the ground, we would still be loyal to Israel. No, she didn't use the word loyal, but I think she used something even stronger. I mean, she's basically trying to say, yeah, it's definitely one and the same country.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's...
You get an answer to the Israeli influence immediately, by the way. Nancy Pelosi condemns Ilhan Omar.
Yeah, right.
Ilhan Omar apologizes unequivocally, having now been, quote, her own words, educated to those tropes one must avoid, which apparently I need some of too, this education. Then, late last week, the Democrats lead a resolution in Congress. Is that a law? I'm not sure. Everyone agrees with it. It's passed.
A bill.
Yeah,
well, proposed bill.
Condemning.
But it didn't get passed. It got thrown out. Here's the thing. It was an expansive definition of anti-Semitism, the same way as the French government proposed. That includes anti-Semitism adopted by the State Department in 2010 and drafted by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. It's a 4-page resolution that denounces accusing Jewish citizens of being more loyal to Israel or to the alleged priorities of Jews worldwide than to the interest of their own nations. And one line praises Jewish enlistment in the U.S. military. So that was an expanding 2010 bill resolution, and expanded it to denouncing the accusation against Jewish citizens of the USA in particular, obviously, of being more loyal to Israel or the alleged priorities of Jews worldwide than to the interests of their own nations, which is obviously America. So it says you cannot accuse Jews, no matter what they do in America, American Jews, you cannot accuse them, no matter what they do, of being more loyal to Israel. Even if what they're doing is clearly... could be construed or could be seen, or could a valid opinion would be that what Jewish activist groups in the US, peopled by US citizens, what they're doing is pushing for policies that are not in the interests of America. But then the question is, like, we keep coming back to this question of, how can you say they're not? Are they not in the interests of America? If everything that Jewish activist groups run by US citizens, US Jewish citizens in the US, if everything they do furthers the protection afforded, let's say, to Israel and secures Israel's position in the Middle East and its survival in the Middle East, then surely that is by definition, from a geopolitical point of view, in the American interest. But when you're talking about American interest, whose interest? What interest are you talking about? Are you talking about the political interest, the political class, the Washington elite? You're talking about the interest of the ordinary American people? What sections of the ordinary American people? It's not so simple,
Yeah.
But as a general rule, if America today is the US political elite class, then everything that Jewish interest groups do to protect Israel is in the interests of US non-Jewish political elite class. Because it's in their interest to have Israel a strong ally in the Middle East, to keep back Iran and to secure the order, the existing order that has existed for many decades in the Middle East that favors American or supports American hegemony in the world.
Yeah, it's a mind job, and it's no wonder then people freak out over it. You mentioned at the beginning the key thing being that historically Jews have seen themselves as a people apart.
Still do.
It seems as though they're reaching to merge while keeping themselves apart. The best parts, that the advantages of keeping themselves apart, they're also look at how up front and center they and their issues are in these three major capitals right now.
Mm-hmm.
we're apart, but we're all over the place.
Mm.
It's like
Yeah. Well, you see,
their own survival or thriving or whatever, their own choice of way of living is coming under threat.
It's not. Well, yeah. Well, not really. I don't think it's got anything to do with ordinary Jewish people. The vast majority of ordinary Jewish people in Western countries, in America or in Western Europe, it's got nothing to do with them. It's got nothing to do with their interests. Some of them, a lot of them, can be co-opted through emotional hooks and all that kind of stuff, and appeals to the homeland in Israel and the religious sentiments. A lot of them can be pulled into serving an agenda. But you get a very clear example of how there's no space between the Western geopolitical perspective and the Western geopolitical agenda in the world. There's no space between that and Israel's interests and the Israeli lobby. They're all working for exactly the same thing, which is the continuation of Western hegemony and dominance in the world. And the Middle East is a big part, a big aspect of that hegemony. The example that where you see that those two things are exactly the same, that they're working for exactly the same agenda, is when you see in the UK, and it's been going on for several years now, where the anti-Semitism, and you talk about anti-Jewish tropes. Anti-Semitism itself has become a trope, or the accusation, or using the accusation of anti-Semitism against someone is a trope at this point, because it's been used against Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Liberal Party in the UK, and he poses a direct threat to the established order, the Western-dominated established order in the UK, which is seen within the Conservative Party and above the Conservative Party, let's say, and even to some extent within it's a kind of deep state or a British establishment elite that is mainly focused on the Conservative Party, but also incorporates some members of who are nominally Labour or leftist.
Yeah,
but they're part of the establishment. They're above that left-right divide in the same way they are in the US, and those people see Jeremy Corbyn as a leader of the Labour Party and the prospective possible next Prime Minister of the UK as a direct threat to the Western order because of his policies. And the main way that they have attacked him over the past few years has been to call him an anti-Semite and to try to create evidence of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party under him. And almost all of it is effectively false. It's made up accusations about him being an anti-Semite and him being surrounded by anti-Semitism. Of course, the only what there is within the Labour movement and the left movement in the UK is a long-standing pro-Palestinian agenda or support for Palestinians and also for the BDS, for the boycott, divest and sanctions, to put pressure on Israel to stop them stealing Palestinian land. That's the extent of anti-Semitism in the UK Labour Party, which is not anti-Semitism at all. But they use that and then expand it and exaggerate it to accuse him and defame the Labour Party and particularly Jeremy Corbyn as an anti-Semite. And it's almost as bad as being called a paedophile. It's close. It's only one step away of being to being called a paedophile in terms of the smear that is affected and the damage that it can do to your reputation.
Yeah.
So the fact that when the British establishment wants to get rid of a potentially, in their eyes, dangerous to their agenda leader, their first port of call is anti-Semitism. Tells you, and not only that, it's not just the non-Jewish British elite who are using this anti-Semitism accusation against Jeremy Corbyn. It's being backed up by Jewish lobby groups. So there you see a direct connection between Jewish lobby groups and Jewish interest groups and Israeli lobby and Israeli, I should really say Israeli lobby and Israeli interest groups and the interests of the British, the Anglo-American, let's say even establishment, or the British establishment, and what their geopolitical world agenda is. There's no difference.
In that respect, then, can we almost, when we open it up to this geopolitical level, can we understand then why they are conflating hatred of Jews specifically with criticism of Israel? Because once Corbyn is defending Hamas, Hezbollah, other Middle Eastern countries and their interests. He is going against the whole order. And do they have is there a logic to then why they say he is the vilest, because he is against Jews, because he is... Do you see what I'm getting at? The conflation of the two, in a way, it's paralogical and it's pathological on the face of it. And most people are condemning it and saying that's outrageous. The French government's backed down. This bill in Congress hasn't passed for now. But isn't there is a kind of a logic to why it's coming to this point of actually legislating and therefore making synonymous hatred of Jews with criticism of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Because in their eyes, if you're criticizing the project, the greater agenda that we all share, the deep staters,
Western hegemony. Yeah.
Is it simply manipulative, realpolitik that they go, okay, let's kill any kind of movement towards ending or revamping or regime changing that order we've been so used to now for 200-300 years. How are we going to do it? And someone sat down, kind of thing, and said, "Well, we'll go at it with this."
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it's evidence of, like I said before, it's evidence of there being no difference between the British establishment and the interests of the British establishment and the interests of the Israeli lobby interests. But it's evidence also of the extent to which the Israeli lobby in Western countries, in the UK, in France, and particularly in the US, has the extent to which the extent of their power within the political establishment. Because essentially, in terms of who makes the decision as to what we'll use against Jeremy Corbyn or what we'll use against Ilhan Omar or AOC or who have criticised Israel.
AOC not so much.
Well, she's listed as well, yeah.
Okay.
And the people who make the decision are the people who are have Jewish, or either Jewish themselves or have pro-Israel, strong pro-Israel leanings. So obviously for them, the first thing that would come to their minds is that this person is anti-Semitic. Mm-hmm. I mean, they feel it. These people who are strongly identified with Israel, be they Jewish or not Jewish, when they see criticism of Israel, they feel that this person is anti-Semitic. So they naturally will accuse a person of being an anti-Semite. Yeah. And the added bonus, obviously, is that it's a very strong, very harsh accusation.
Yeah.
A damning accusation to make against someone can smear someone quite badly.
And down the road, we mentioned this before, it's not difficult to see where this would lead to. If you damage and smear a lot of essentially good or well-liked people over and over and over, and maybe it dies down, but then you do it again to someone else and so on. Sooner or later, this new lingo they're talking about, where Omar herself used it, educated to these tropes. I've seen it used in other articles and by commentators. It seems to be a big thing at the moment. One must be educated about them. Oh, you didn't know that you crossed a red line here.
Right.
Hang on, sit down and I'll explain it to you. What is the actual education process that's going to take place in the host countries? Isn't it really obvious that what's going on, what will happen, is a kind of the opposite of what their psychological wish? It's going to have a reverse psychological effect where people are going to take as a heuristic, as a base. It's going to confirm the old trope that the Jews are in control of all these things.
Of course, that's the problem. That's the problem, is that that's all it does. And they have to then up the... They
double down.
Well, they have to increase their censorship of people and control over people to stop them from expressing what the Israeli lobby is giving them more evidence of being true.
The Guardian, by the way, said that thing they tried to pass in Congress was the Israeli lobby was pushing for that.
Absolutely, of course it was. Yeah, well, it was. I mean, the original draft was. The original draft from 2010 that they were expanding on was drafted by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. I mean, of course, that's staffed by or populated by Jews, But it's interesting the way that it's that idea of, unaware of these people being unaware of these tropes, unaware that they can at any moment say something that is anti-Semitic and not even know about it themselves. But that then validates the claim that non-Jewish people are, by definition, or genetically, effectively, almost genetically, anti-Semitic. They don't even know it. They don't even know that they don't like Jews or that they have a hatred or whatever for Jews, non-Jewish people.
Yeah.
That's what some Jewish people claim.
Which
and I
is
think it's held to by a
remarkably
lot of people. It's very similar to
the thing that you have unconscious racism.
Racism, that you don't know about racism. And you need people who are the victims of racism then to train you and teach you about your inherent racism and tell you, kind of be a mentor to you. They should walk alongside you for a few months, spend all their time with you for a few months and watching you, and then educate you. When you open your mouth, they'll listen to what you say, and then they'll point out where you're being racist in the words that you say, and so you then can correct yourself. The same thing could be in theory advocated for anti-Semitism. You know, that everybody should have a Jewish person beside them to listen to everything you say and to everything the non-Jewish person says at any given point, and then to highlight. You see, there's a little bit of anti-Semitism creeping into what you said. Do you see, when you said that word oy vey, were you using it in a positive way or a negative way? Because that's actually a Hebrew or Yiddish word, and maybe you shouldn't be using that. So you could get this kind of instruction. You could have a mentor, a Jewish mentor or a person of color mentor, maybe for white people who are but even unconsciously racist and unconsciously anti-Semitic.
That's for the unconscious masses. But even among, quote unquote, the tribe, Ben Shapiro, he's this close to saying it. He hasn't quite published an article or been on camera to say it, but I think he's been tweeting about it. He's getting close to the point of accusing Bernie Sanders of being an anti-Semite, because Sanders basically defended Omar's views specifically with respect to she has a point about Israeli power and Israeli policy in the Middle East. Let her say it. He basically defended her. That's considered, once you've said anything close to defending that view, that would in the new dynamic, that immediately puts you as an anti-Semite. And he says Ben Shapiro will say that kind of thing about Bernie Sanders, knowing, everyone knows in the United States, that his parents, Bernie Sanders' parents, he's old enough that his parents were killed in or were in concentration camps.
Well, you can be a self-hating Jew. That's been around for a long time anyway, so they have that covered as well.
Ben Shapiro, and there's a guy this is identity politics. Which came on first? The mania for identity politics in general, or specifically the issue of Jewish identity? And it's funny how it's all caught up in itself, because here you have someone who would ordinarily be fated, and she was by the left, Ilhan Omar, and a few others, but specifically her because she's the first Muslim Somali refugee. She ticks all the boxes for diversity and multiculturalism. Right. Oops, she just crossed the red line. That's the one identity we don't question.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that the reason this has come up and is an issue right now is also, and in the Democratic Party, is that they're a victim of their own kind of the identity politics that the Democrats and the left in the US have adopted over the past number of years, because that's the reason why you have Ilhan Omar and the other one from Michigan, Rashida Tlaib, and even AOC, even though she's not Jewish, but she's very much part of the identity politics brigade that have got into power and become the freshman congresswomen. And the fact is that, you by definition, almost inevitably, you're going to get some Muslims in there, and if they're young Muslims, ideologically driven and stuff, they're going to be, as we've seen with, particularly with Ilhan Omar, they're going to be in some way or other anti-Israel and pro-Palestinian, let's say. So the problem is that, and then they're going to be accused of being anti-Semitic, and that's, you have a member of the Democratic Party who is making what are called anti-Semitic statements. Now, normally the Democratic Party is historically very pro-Israel, exactly like the Republican Party, for a very long time. All of American politics has been super pro-Israel. So why aren't the Democratic Party, why didn't they get this resolution passed? Why was it rejected? Because there's a pushback from within the Democratic Party, even within the kind of upper echelons of it, not up to Nancy Pelosi and people like that, because she's still diehard pro-Israel, but even below that, you have people who are not supporting this resolution and defending Ilhan Omar in her and the accusation that she's anti-Semitic because of Trump, because they see it.
We need a united front against Trump.
Right. And this is actually a way to, first, one of the responses from a lot of the Democrats in this is that this is distracting from our attacks on Trump for being anti-racist and sexist and anti-immigrant and blah, 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 blah. This is, trying, and it's infighting within the Democratic Party. We shouldn't do it, so we have to dismiss this accusation of anti-Semitism and refocus on getting Trump. And also, it's a useful tool because Trump is seen as very pro-Israel. So if the Democrats want to be anti-Trump, they kind of have to, some of them anyway are thinking we have to be anti-Israel. Because if we're anti-Trump and Trump is pro-Israel, we have to be anti-Israel. So Ilhan Omar is she's all right, leave her alone.
Right.
But that's coming away from the historic Democratic Party stance on Israel, which is absolutely 100% pro-Israel because of the Israel lobby in the USA. And there's a video here that will just segue into with Ilhan Omar, which is a short little video. And it's funny the way CNN, Christine Amanpour, of all people, who's very pro-Israel as well. But it's amazing that what she actually says here, because she asked her a question. Go ahead and play the video there.
Can I just move on to something that's generally sort of a rite of passage for politicians in the United States, and that is to sort of profess sort of fealty or at least pay homage to AIPAC, the pro-Israel PAC that is very, very prominent. Should Jewish Americans be worried about Congresswoman Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib because of the BDS movement, because of one of the tweets that you made a long time ago? You're part of a new wave of Democrats not afraid to be critical of the government of Israel. And during the 2012 military offensive in Gaza, you tweeted, "Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel." How do you put that into context now, and what do you say to American Jews?
So I remember when that was happening,
let me see that
watching
video.
TV.
Yeah, just stop it there, Scotty. Just go back to the beginning and play the first 20 seconds again.
Can I just move on to something that's generally sort of a rite of passage for politicians in the United States, and that is to sort of profess sort of fealty or at least pay homage to AIPAC, the pro-Israel PAC that is very, very prominent.
Just stop there. This is CNN, and this is Christine Amanpour, who is very much an establishment politician, absolutely pro-US, pro-Washington establishment, pro-Israel by definition. The word she used there. Play it again, Scotty, will you?
Can I just move on to something that's generally sort of a rite of passage for politicians in the United States, and that is
a rite of passage for politicians in the USA.
Politicians just generally.
All politicians in the USA. And so Christine Amanpour is just saying it as a matter of fact that a rite of passage for new politicians in the USA, and a rite of passage is when it's a passage from one group to another, from one organization, from one whatever, from one entity to another.
Yeah.
So she's using that word, and it's that term, and it's a very appropriate term, because when you become a politician in the USA, you go from being a politician in the USA to having to declare fealty or homage to AIPAC, which is a very powerful. And she was about to say lobby,
but she said PAC.
And then she said, well, PAC.
Political. No, it's not actually a political.
But it's a lobby.
Committee.
It's obviously
it's a foreign lobby.
The first word was the correct one. It's lobby. So American politicians, when they become politicians, have to go through a process of going from being a US politician to being someone who professes fealty and homage to the Israeli lobby in America. That's according to CNN. Now, how can anybody then come out and say that there's no lobby that exercises disproportionate influence on American political life, like the Israeli lobby? How can they say that it doesn't exist? Or how can anybody criticize anybody for saying that? That's the problem here, is that CNN just told all of its viewers that this is an objective truth, basically.
Yes.
That American politicians have to pay fealty, loyalty.
She wasn't
profess their loyalty to an Israeli lobby.
She wasn't using it ironically either.
No.
Matter of factly.
The thing she was saying was that this is what happens, and how do you reconcile that with your statements against Israel? I mean, how can you justify the fact that you're critical of Israel when all US politicians have to pay homage and declare their undying loyalty to Israel as an American politician? And nobody has a problem with that. That's bizarre.
It's as if Amanpour has a license to basically speak an anti-Semitic trope, which is what it's called in other contexts. She has perfect license to say that to the newbie, and only depending on the newbie's response to it will that trope be cashed in and used as such, as a trope. Mm-hmm. It's totally like, it's in your face. It's public. Like it's a public kind of test.
Yeah.
A test of that fealty and homage. Mm-hmm. And depending on your response now, will decide whether or not you're in the club.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of gaslighting, basically.
Yes.
That for so many years, Israeli lobby and Israeli activist groups and, who are Jewish, essentially, members of the Jewish American community, who are driven ideologically partly by the religious beliefs, a lot of them. Others with more awareness do it for considerations of power and their own personal power and influence. That's what a lot of things come down to, obviously. What motivates a lot of human beings is influence and power and money. That has existed in the US for a very, very long time. Mm-hmm. And it's a no-brainer. It's public knowledge, basically, that Israel, these groups that represent, they don't really represent Jews. It's not about Jews. It's about Israel. It's about the state of Israel. And it's about a group of people who are maybe nominally Jews, but at the upper levels don't really care about their religion at all, but have in some way or other, through very well-known and obvious means, have insinuated themselves into positions of power or positions of influence within American politics, and they use that in service to the state of Israel, I suppose. But that doesn't really cover it. At this point, we get into a very grey, murky area, and I'm not really sure what the point is anymore, other than power itself. And at this point, the interests of Israel as a country in the Middle East and its particular interests in the Middle East that are unique to it, and the interests of America, having Israel as an ally to further American interests in the Middle East and around the world, they converge, basically. And
you can no longer separate them.
You can't separate the two, and you can't really... I think religion is dispensed with, like Judaism and like these Jewish activists that go around.
Even Jewish nationalism is dispensed with.
No, it's all dispensed with. It's more about control over as much of the world as possible. You have this merging of the American elite and the American empire and the American hegemony around the world. Those interests converging with, nominally Israeli interests, only to the extent that Israel is quite an important piece of the puzzle in terms of securing American hegemony. But that's why you have most, isn't it true? Is it true that, no, it's not, I don't think it's true that most Jews in the world live in America, is it?
I was looking at this earlier. 6.3 million in Israel.
Right. Right.
5.7, nearly the same million in
the US.
the United States.
Okay, so
After that, it drops way
right.
off.
So then it's true what I'm saying. I would leave out Israel because obviously there's going to be a majority of Jews in Israel, or a big number of Jews in Israel. But in terms of the rest of the world, that's why so many Jews are in America, because that is the seat of well, it's the seat of the global empire, right? America is the seat of a global empire, and it's where you can exercise most power, let's say, in terms of global affairs.
And most money making.
and
Sorry to
most
say
money.
that, but that is just what it is.
But it's not anti-Semitic to say that Jews. I mean, it's not.
Well, but as soon as I've articulated in the context of our discussion,
but
it's
silly.
like, oh, he's making this association with Jews. No,
Right. But it's,
I mean,
as if Jews,
everyone
as
who
if
wants to make money.
right? As if Jews are the only ones who are interested in money. I like money, you know. There's a lot of people who like money, obviously, including Donald Trump.
And Saudi princes.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is that, just as maybe a possible answer to why this is happening in these three countries, as you mentioned, at the same time, you know, USA, France, and the UK, where they're all kind of pushing or they're hyping the threat of anti-Semitism and needing to clamp down on anti-Semitism, etc. There's a poll, a Gallup poll released just recently, showed that 38% of liberal Democrats sympathise more with Palestinians compared to 41% who sympathise more with Israel. And the survey found that national support for Israel in America, national support for Israel, is at an all-time low since 2009, down 5% from last year alone. So that's one reason to stop the rot type of thing.
Yeah.
When you have an Israel lobby, let's say, an interest group like that wields a lot of power within American politics and has done for quite a long time and has increased itself in power, when it sees public opinion, you know, because obviously you have to keep public opinion on side as well to secure that power within the country. You have to keep people on song and in support of Israel and feeling aware of anti-Semitism. So that's why you promote the idea of anti-Semitism on the rise, to get people to essentially be supportive of Jews and of Jewish interests, which by extension is Israel, the state of Israel, because that's ultimately their homeland, right?
Support being a strange word. It's more like to get them afraid of.
Right. Well, afraid of not supporting.
Right.
Let's say afraid of saying anything that is not in support of it. You know, and I don't think. I mean, this in the bill or the proposal that the Democrats put forward. The resolution denounced accusing Jewish citizens of being more loyal to Israel or to the alleged priorities of Jews worldwide. Well, I don't think there are any priorities of Jews worldwide necessarily, but accusing Jewish citizens in the US of being more loyal to Israel, I don't know. I mean, a lot of them probably don't care about Israel. They're Jews who live in America. Maybe even a majority of the Jews who live in America see themselves as American. They're Jewish American. Big deal. Jewish is just Judaism is my religion. But there are, I think, a lot of people, certainly people who are, activists for different political activist committees and stuff, who are themselves Jewish and see Israel as ultimately their homeland, if not their physical homeland, their spiritual homeland. You know, so how do you tease that one out for those people? Where ultimately do your priorities or do your allegiances lie? If it came down to it, and you had to choose between something that was in the interest of America but not in the interest of Israel, or vice versa, which would you go with? Difficult question for anybody, any diaspora, who retains strong ties to their homeland or the home of their parents, or in the case of Israel, their created homeland for them as a people to, etc. It's a difficult question for anybody. So, I mean, to say that you simply, it's an anti-Semitic trope and you're an evil, dirty person for saying that some Jews who live in other countries and were born in other countries may have a stronger allegiance to Israel than to their home countries. Why is that anti-Semitic? Because it could be true of any other people. It's just a part of human condition, you know? Mm-hmm. The problem is that because the reason you're not allowed to say that is because it opens the door, points upwards to the existence of a powerful political Jewish lobby within American politics, and that exerts an awful lot of influence over American affairs. Now, whether or not those affairs, that influence is against American interests or for American interests, like we talked earlier on, depends on what your definition of American interests are and whose interests. Yeah, obviously, Israeli interests and the interests of the Israeli lobby are exactly the same as the interests of the American political elite, because it relates to Israel and it relates to America's securing America's hegemony in the world through its control over or maintenance of the order in the Middle East, which for which Israel is an important, or plays an important role.
Yeah.
But in the interest of the ordinary American people, no, to the extent that Israel and Israeli kind of lobby and activist groups in the US have lobbied strongly for the invasion of Iraq, the war, American bombing or NATO bombing of Libya and of Syria and stuff, that sends US troops into harm's way. No, it's not in the interests of the ordinary Americans whose sons and daughters go to fight and die in wars that this lobbyist group has a part in advocating for.
Yeah. Of that 40% or so, is it 40% of Americans who do support Israel? You know, come what may. A huge tranche of that is informed by religious beliefs, specifically that Israel must be brought to the point of utter destruction, because the end times are coming, at which point they'll convert and be welcomed into our tribe proper as Christians, as us. So it's a tightly bound alliance we have with them because they're about to be a part of us. It's a weird narrative, I know, but that is actually what informs the brotherhood for a large section, or that's what they're told anyway, and that's what they believe to some extent or another in the United States, about why we must be tightly bound. And come what may, the capital may fall, but we still have Israel.
For the eschaton.
For the eschaton, it's a completely bonkers mix.
There's an article here on this story from the New York Times there, Scott, if you can pull it up. It's kind of a cynical, or a rather coy title to it. Ilhan Omar's criticism raises the question, is AIPAC too powerful? Well, maybe you should have asked that question 30, 40 years ago, maybe, and asked it every single year since then, but because obviously it is. But this, there's a guy in this who's referred to, well, not referred to, his name is Stephen Fisk. He's an American citizen, and he's a long-time activist with the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, and so he's involved in activism for Israel. If you scroll down a little bit there, Scotty, to the just this first picture down below the title picture, there's a picture of him at his home in Florida. He's a long-time activist with AIPAC and praying at his home in Florida. Now, he's obviously a devout, very religious Jew, and he and down at the very bottom there, if you just go down to way past all the pictures to more or less the last paragraph, the second last paragraph, it says, in Florida, Mr. Fisk, who you just saw in the image, said it was time for pro-Jewish voices to speak up about Miss Omar and two other Republican freshmen who have been critical of Israel. That's Tlab and AOC. And he offered a prediction. There are three people who, in my opinion, will not be around in several years. So this guy is fairly high up, but he's an example of these religiously driven individuals who have been active in pro-Israel, pro-Jewish groups for many years, and he is the one who sounded the alarm, let's say, about and started an activism against these three women for their quote-unquote anti-Semitism. But it's interesting that he makes the prediction that they won't be around in a few years. That right there says, well, how does he have the conviction to be able to say that three just recently elected new congresswomen will be gone in a number of years?
I suspect because he's speaking from experience.
That's how it works.
Cynthia McKinney.
Right. Well,
Cynthia McKinney, fated in the 90s.
Right.
First black woman representative for Georgia. Won 6 terms in a row. 9/11 happens. She questions that maybe the government had foreknowledge, and then criticizes Israeli bombings of Palestinians. And boom.
Yep.
The next one up in 2002 in the Democratic primaries, this woman comes out of nowhere. Cynthia lays claim that this woman is actually a creature of AIPAC. Later, subsequently, that's proven to be true. She was put in there to kick her off the platform. And McKinney, of course, has since gone on to be an activist in
Right.
many number of things, but she was dead right on that. AIPAC actually came in and said, she's a problem, you're out of the club.
And she was gone, yeah. So there's an interview here with from a few years ago with Press TV with Cynthia McKinney where she explains just a few things. Won't play it all, but you'll get the general gist here from in a few minutes.
Not allowed to do that because I did not toe the line on U.S. policy for Israel.
What line is that they wanted? Were you told directly that you had to toe a line, or explain that to me?
Well, every candidate for Congress at that time had a pledge. They were given a pledge to sign. And I was new on the scene. And so the pledge had Jerusalem as the capital city, the military superiority of Israel.
American Congress people have to sign this pledge.
Yes, you sign the pledge. If you don't sign the pledge, you don't get money. So, for example, it was almost like water torture for me. My parents observed this. I would get a call, and the person on the other end of the phone would say, I want to do a fundraiser for you. And then we would get into the planning. I would get really excited because, of course, you have to have money in order to run a campaign. And then 2 weeks, 3 weeks into the planning, they would say, did you sign the pledge? And then I would say, no, I didn't sign the pledge. And then my fundraiser would go kaput.
So, I just want to get into this pledge a little bit more. So this is basically something that is mandatory, that every congressperson has to sign, saying that, Jerusalem, you said, is the capital of Israel, and what else?
You make a commitment that you will vote to support the military superiority of Israel, that the economic assistance that Israel wants, that you would vote to provide that.
This isn't a question for the Congress people serving, that they are representing, or they're supposed to be representing, the people of the United States, not a foreign country, and yet they have to pledge allegiance to a foreign state.
That's what
no one questions this.
That's what I was asked to do. And I made it public. This probably nobody had said anything about it, but I made it public, and then, the excuse was, those were just overzealous advocates for Israel. So then the tactic changed, and but this is what is done for 535 members of the United States Congress. 100 senators, 435 members of the House of Representatives have to now write a paragraph, which basically says the same thing. So it's not a pledge, but it's a paragraph, and you post it, and, there are these forums you have to go to at the synagogues or whatever. And then, if you don't perform appropriately, then you don't get money to run your campaign. The problem is that it requires an awful lot of money to run a campaign. And whether it's a woman's organization, an environmental organization, people can read about this on the internet if they're interested. If you go to thomas.loc.gov, that is the official United States Congress website. And if you put in the name Gus Savage, because Gus Savage was a black member of Congress who was targeted by the pro-Israel lobby. And he had the foresight to use his position as an incumbent in the House of Representatives to put his experience on the congressional record. For the entire existence of the United States Congress now, people will be able to access his experience. And what he wrote was that it was the Garden Club of New Jersey that gave his opponent $5,000. But it wasn't really the Garden Club of New Jersey. It was the activists who were associated with AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee.
That's it in black and white, really.
Yeah, and that woman, actually, Mariza Hashami, I think her name is. She was.
She's herself American.
The Iranian. interviewer, is she was arrested in prison for 10 days for espionage.
She tried to return to see her family in the States.
Yeah, she was released after 10 days, but she was officially arrested and imprisoned for espionage. She's an Iranian Press TV interviewer, or news reporter. You know?
Again, diversity is awesome, except if you say certain things.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty much what Omar is going through now. Although it's bizarre that they've made such a massive issue out of it but the comparison isn't really the same because it's a series of tweets versus Cynthia McKinney's talking about more of a legal situation. It's paralegal. It's not literally in law that senators must, but it's expected. And if you don't, no cash.
No money, yeah. And no money, bye-bye. So that's the state of affairs. I mean, it's the fact of the matter is that it's true that there's an Israeli lobby in the US, and when people are accused of being anti-Semitic because they point out the influence of the Israeli lobby in the US, or they point out the mistreatment of Palestinians by Israel, it's obviously not anti-Semitic on the face of it. You'd have to look at each specific situation to see if the person has any actual hatred for Jews, but the vast majority of people, ordinary people who simply look at the mistreatment of Palestinians and say that's bad, Israel is bad for doing that, they're obviously not anti-Semitic. They don't care about Jews. That's maybe the problem for these people, is they don't care that much about Jews. They actually, it's kind of trying to say you care so much about Jews because you hate them so much, and it's like, no, do you not hear what I said? My focus is on Palestinians. I care about them. I don't really care about Jews. Jews aren't an issue for me because Jews aren't doing so badly. Jews are doing quite well. Why would I be concerned about them? Why would I focus on them at all? They're doing very well on their own, especially in in the world, in most of the world where they live. They're all doing very well. So why are you focusing on Jews? The Jews isn't the issue in this situation. It's Palestinians is the issue.
Yeah.
And that's what brought up this issue, and the reason we're talking about it now is because essentially Ilhan Omar made comments that included criticism of Israeli treatment of Palestinians. So the focus is on Palestinians, not Jews, but I don't know. It's bizarre. The whole situation is bizarre. And like you said earlier on, it's a dangerous situation for ordinary Jews around the world where whatever Western governments and Israeli, high-level activists within those governments engaged in activism and support and pushing an Israeli agenda are actually creating a situation where those old tropes about Jews, about ordinary Jews, are being are being pushed to the fore again, and they're actually creating, or they're likely to create, a resurgence of actual anti-Semitism because of what they're doing. If they would just stop, anti-Semitism would continue to decline. But they seem determined through their own action and their own actions and their desire to increase their own power and influence. They're actually hurting the ordinary Jewish people of the world and putting them in a dangerous position where whatever latent anti-Semitism might be there will find new impetus or a new force in society.
Yeah.
If I say something publicly that is heartfelt, has no, does not target anybody negatively, but seeks to support people who are suffering. So if I engage in some genuinely humanitarian, honourable, noble speech in support of something positive, and a bunch of people all come out and shut me down and tell me to shut the hell up, and I'm not allowed to say that, in quite a cruel, abusive way, and they say that they are doing it in the name of the Jews, how am I going, ultimately, if you repeat that, how ultimately am I going to feel about Jews in general? If I'm being told that I'm being censored and shut up and denied my civil rights, essentially, in the name of the Jews, is that in the interest of ordinary Jews? And who's doing that? And who's using the name of the Jews to shut me up? Well, it's their purported leaders.
Yeah.
And not only the purported leaders, but their non-Jewish buddies in power in Western governments.
Yeah.
So they're actually creating a situation that is very negative, potentially very negative for the Jews by discriminating against and censoring the speech of non-Jewish people in the name of the Jews, invoking the name of the Jews. The Jews we're doing this to protect the Jews. You have to shut the hell up and not say anything, regardless of what it is, about Israel. Well, unless it's positive, but you cannot say anything negative about Israel. You cannot support the Palestinians, or you will be slandered and defamed in the name of the Jews. That's just such a bad idea.
And it's been broadened in many other venues too. If you use the term globalist, if you talk about banks and banking, the banking crisis, 2008. Oh, Donald Trump, when in his later speeches, probably written by Bannon as he came close to the election in 2016, was being accused of anti-Semitism, of bringing up the old tropes when you talk about globalists, the banks, and so on. Finally, the etymology, the origins of how Jeremy Corbyn got to this point of being the vile anti-Semite are interesting as well. He had just put forward his name in July 2015 when the first hint of it came. The Channel 4 in the UK and the BBC put him to the question, and the question was over his past support for Hezbollah and Hamas. They didn't mention Jews, Israel, or anti-Semitism yet, but that laid the groundwork for a month later, during the actual election itself of Labour Party candidates, the Jewish Chronicle, which is a London-based newspaper. As you can imagine, its readership is tiny. It's primarily aimed at Jews. It's been a printed paper in London since 1840 or something. It's old. That first accused Jeremy Corbyn of anti-Semitism, and it's just completely snowballed from there. Maybe not quite snowballed. It's come in waves, but it's a mania in the UK at the moment where it's every day, daily, non-stop. You're not supposed to talk about it. You're not supposed to think about it. What they'd like you to do is what Meghan McCain did last week. Just
cry about it.
Yield to pure emotional thinking and just start blubbering.
But she did that. That was fake, basically, and she did it for her own personal interests. Like, she has no concern for the Jews, or no concern about anti-Semitism. I mean, she's just pandering to. She's an example. Her doing that is an example of the power of the Israeli lobby, where she expects to get some bucks for, or some support or some privileges from doing that, from abasing herself at the altar of the Israeli lobby.
What about Donald Trump then?
Well, he's doing the same thing. Shelton Adelson, super uber Jewish or Israeli, pro-Israeli dude who gave him $25 million for his campaign. I think we'll leave it there for this week, folks. I think that's about all we can say, really, about the Jewish situation, the Jewish situation, about the Israeli lobby and the current brouhaha, I suppose, over anti-Semitism and the Democrat Party. I don't think there's much more to say about it that you can that would make much sense. It's, it is what it is. It's a will to personal power and to influence, and within the West at a time when things are faltering, I suppose, on the global stage, or on a global scale, and it's kind of like, I don't know, musical chairs, I suppose. People grasping for as much power as they possibly can, and desperately, as they feel it slipping away from their grasp.
And everyone's narratives, getting them, as you said to me earlier, everyone's getting hoisted on their own petards by getting caught up.
Right.
Now you're infringing diversity.
Right.
Now you're infringing anti-Semitism. And
right.
It's like, rah.
Right. Absolutely.
Mayhem.
So it'll probably only get worse and more confusing and more of a farce, really.
Yeah.
And we'll try to continue making sense of it as we go ahead. So if you like this video, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. We'll be back next week or soon enough with another video on another topic. Until then, have a good evening.
Thanks for watching. Bye.